Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I am back from a week off. I was away in Italy for business and decided not to bring my mics and such on the trip. I kind of optimized the heck out of my carry-on bags, and I managed to accumulate a grand total of nothing after 7 days in Rome and Milan, except for a gift umbrella one of my clients was giving out at the trade show, as well as a whole bunch of receipts. I don't know why I keep those, but anyway, I wrote a little bit about the trip, 2+ days in Rome, then 3+ days in Milan for business. Rome was for fun. And, I could ramble about it here, but I'll try and go into those more in my newsletter. I kept pretty good notes, and I've been keeping a visual notebook, just doing a sketch or two each day, trying to really imprint stuff in my brain since that trip started. But anyway, I want to say that the highlight of the whole shebang is the one I was expecting to have. It was the whole reason I wanted to go to Rome, really. Just getting to see the statue of the boxer at rest at the Palazzo Massimo and drawing it a few times. I spent a while sitting and standing with the statue, just taking it in from a lot of angles, trying to capture different aspects of it, just in hopes that I would embed it all in my brain. I've seen the thing, I've seen the statue a whole bunch of times in, magazine and online, and read about it, especially in the Tom Jones story, The Pugilist at Rest, that first turned me on to the statue. But just sitting there in its presence and getting a sketch pad out and my microns and just trying to capture something about the light and about the posture and about the angles that aren't caught. I got as close as I could to the face of it. The boxer at rest is this statue or sculpture's bronze of a boxer who's sitting down, one foot kind of up, and his arms are sort of crossed across his lap, and he's looking up and to the right at somebody who's saying something to him, and he's got this kind of querulous expression on his face, and he's all beat to heck. You can see not just the weathering of the bronze, but the actual shape of the face, all the damage he's taken over the years. The model, I mean. And anyway, the eye sockets are empty. The whole thing is, to me, really haunting when you look at this face, and there's just these empty eyes. And I got as close as you can get to it with the vinyl rope, the barrier that's set up. But I really looked in there, and the hollowness inside, and the whole thing is hollow. And I had this feeling like I understood something about time. And not just antiquity, not just the being in Rome and feeling the weight of that history, but something longer than history. I mean, it's impossible for me to talk about, so obviously I'm going to do it here, right? Anyway, there's more to tell. And I started writing a poem about the statue during the flight home. It's funny, I got a few verses into it before I started thinking, this reminds me of something, and realized I was basically writing sort of the inverse of the archaic torso of Apollo by Rilke. If anything, I was describing the things that were there, while Rilke's describing the absence of the head and the eyes and everything else. And anyway, I may keep working on it, and I'll see if, now that I become conscious of what I'm doing and the artifice of it all, if that completely derails me, or if I can still just capture the feeling that I was trying to get across. Anyway, there's more to tell, but let's talk about writing and art. That's why we're here. My guest this week, he's been on twice before, once in person, once remote. His name is Sven Birkerts, and he has this wonderful new essay collection, The Miro Worm and the Mysteries of Writing. It's just come out from Arrowsmith Press. Now, Sven and I recorded this episode last July. He lives up in Amherst, and I was going to be in Boston, so I thought, why not cross the state and sit down with Sven for a morning into the afternoon? Which is to say, I read the book back in July. It's not super fresh in my brain, but I did enjoy it an awful lot as I've gone back over it while preparing for this. The Miro Worm is a collection that stems from Sven's introductory pieces to Agni or Agni, we discussed the pronunciation, magazine, the literary magazine he's the editor of, which coincidentally just celebrated its 100th issue. Now, I've been a fan of Sven's writing since the 90s, when I read his Gutenberg elegies, and that was back when we were wondering what effect word processing and computers were going to have on the act of writing and the act of reading, how technology was going to come between us and the word. So his explorations of literature, art, technology, and the reading and writing self they've been important guides for me he's going to hate when I say this, over the decades. And with this new book, he gets into discussions of photography, Bob Dylan, the iconography or myth making of author photos, and what happens in the alchemy of writing, the mysteries of writing, as he puts it, among other subjects. And they're often tinged with his uneasy relationship with technology. But the thing is, Sven is someone for whom writing defines the self, and seeing his self distilled here on the page is it's just a marvel for someone who's as fragmented or fragmentary as I am, how inconsistent my persona is from intro to intro, newsletter to newsletter, person to person. There's a self that he really captures and that evolves over the course of again, decades of his writing. And in one of the pieces in this book, he writes, "For me, the deep draw of the personal essay has always been that it represents an orchestration of thought, a rendering of how the mind processes experience. This, far more than the pretext, the ostensible occasion of the essay, is the interesting thing." And I can't agree more, and that's why I love Sven's writing and why I love this collection. And in a sense, the Miro Worm speaks to some of the other personal essayists I've talked with in recent months, especially Philip Lopate and the show I did with Nicholas Delbanco about a month or so later, as well as my 2024 trek through Knausgaard's My Struggle, that interaction of the personal with a subject that opens up into something greater, I guess. Anyway, love the collection. Go get The Miro Worm and the Mysteries of Writing. Miro is M-I-R-O. It's out now from Arrowsmith Press. And just revel in this, in the joy of his prose, the revelation of the self, the depth of a writer's engagement with the world. Because that's why we're here. I don't mean in the world. I mean, that's why you guys are listening to this right now. Because it's about writing and about art and engagement and what it means to what we reveal of ourselves in how we see the world around us. Anyway, reconnecting with Sven for our third session also means we dispense with all the pleasantries and get right down to the weird digressions and tangents that make for a fun conversation and a fun essay. And here's Sven's bio. Sven Birkerts is the author of 11 books of essay and memoir, including the Gutenberg Elegies and Changing the Subject, Art and Attention in the Internet Age. He is the former director of the Bennington Writing Seminars and the co-editor of the journal Agni. He lives in Amherst with his wife, Lynn. And now, the 2024 Virtual Memories Conversation with Sven Birkerts. near the beginning of the book where you talk about the role Hopscotch played, Cortázar's book, reminded me, there's several angles to this, reminded me of the joy of those guideposts. Those, before we had algorithms, before there were recommendation engines,
yes,
you followed threads. Like Theseus, you're in the labyrinth and you are finding all of these different threads around it to figure out, oh, this writer writes about these people, and
yes,
we're in Amherst, which is where I was first turned on to Gaddis and Gas and all of those folks, and each one kind of led me to the next thing and the next thing. But that gets us to the new collection. Talk about the threads, I guess. Talk about how this all came together. The mirror.
Well, the concrete origin story is
Radioactive Spider. This happens all the time.
No, it's actually, in a way, I started editing Agni, however we pronounce that.
I've always wondered. I figured you would know.
It has so many
that
I have to choose from who I'm talking to. There's Agni, Agni.
I usually go with Agni because I want to sound Italian, even though it's not an Italian word.
And I'd go more with Agni, really, because it's a Sanskrit root for Ugun's fire, Agni, but we somehow morphed it in. Anyway, so there's always been a tradition, as with many journals, where, the editor writes some kind of a forward to the issue, and I thought I would try to capitalize on this, and rather than writing kind of a fun little guide into the issue, I would just address whatever literary question was on my mind. So, twice a year this would come around for many years. And, most of the pieces in the book originally served as opening essays. But I always wanted them to be freestanding, not to refer to the journal itself.
Yeah,
maybe
on page 35 you'll find...
that kind of thing. And as with anything, and God, I'm sure you notice, when the first time and second time of doing something, you've already created the inner precedent, so 4 months ahead of what would be the next one, you've already vaguely gestating, starting to think, well, what's interesting, what haven't I gone on about? And God knows that's always a challenge, because after a while one has gone on about a great
Either
deal.
have I done this already, or I think you may have heard me talk about this before, the columnist curse.
Yes, oh God, yes.
Which is eventually you will get to a point of writing, I'm not saying Hitler was right, but, and that's the moment you put the pen down and quit the columnist's role. So I'm glad you never reached that point.
Right.
But yeah, trying to figure out territory you'd already trod.
Yeah. So I'd say maybe I don't know how many of those are in here, but it's a small selection. I mean, over 20 plus years to a year. I mean, I had probably 40 intros, all of them essays. Some of them which had wheedled their way into some earlier places. I mean, books, kind of. But I realized as I was thinking of the idea of doing a book is that they very much represented what I most favored and do favor in the world is an idiosyncratic worldview. They're totally non-academic. They don't come out of the university in any sense. They're not, and I spent years and years doing straight up, literary essays either on certain writers or certain trends, and they're not that either. I think in each case, it was connected in each case, at least with those essays, to something, and it's in the title actually, something that I felt was part of the mysterious aspect of writing, and that became kind of my search prompt or whatever as I started going through, say, what am I dealing with here? And so often it is about a mentality that is kind of different from many currently promoted mentalities. It is offbeat. It's odd. And I guess I should unpack the title. So it's called The Moreau Worm and the Mysteries of Writing. So I got to the mysteries part. But the Moreau Worm comes from a very specific essay, and I think that essay also sort of illustrates or makes clear the kind of thinking that goes into the writing that I both, do myself and admire in certain other writers. And this had to do with being up on a lake in Vermont early in the morning, and there was a kind of boardwalk between a hut and the house itself, and I was on my way to the hut, and the boards are damp, the sun is shining. I look down, there's this fantastic squiggle, which, for a moment, it was the estrangement, thing. I didn't know what it was. And then I suddenly saw it start to move. And there's something about that moment of recognition. And then I go on into the essay, and I'm not going to go too deep in the unpacking. Yeah. But it connected very much with Cortázar, who we've already mentioned, because I had, when I go anywhere, it's usually a long process trying to pre-imagine my mentality so I'll know what I'll be wanting to read, which may have nothing to do with the state I'm in at that moment. But this was, it was a book that's been sitting around forever, which I've dabbled in, and I suddenly saw it, and that was the one I wanted, just kind of the serendipitous little twinkle there, and it was Cortázar's Around the Day in 80 Worlds, which is just offbeat, eccentric little musings of every sort. And I forget the exact connection, but I had that worm, which I later decided looked so much like a Moreau line. And then I was reading sections of the Cortázar, and I'm not going to be able to recreate the precise connection there, but that's what allowed the essay in a way to get written, was, and totally serendipitous, which is part of the covert methodology of all of this, is, opening to the serendipitous and trusting that serendipity is not random chance, but it's a little more inflected.
Yeah, it's less arbitrary.
Yes.
The serendipity leads to those connections.
Yes.
Where,
you have to be ready
where the
for the
arbitrariness is sort of
moment. So it's telling you something about where you are. So that, I guess that's the mission. It's not a mission of a book, but that's kind of the identity of it.
The through line. If we're going to make a pitch.
And I was just recently, as I mentioned when you came, I've been listening to your interview with Sebastian Smee. And right near the end of that, I wish there had been, another 5 minutes tacked on.
There usually is. We just don't record it.
Question about the inner life, as if it's a thing that is under threat, which I believe very much it is.
Yeah.
Subtle threat, leakage away of that focus and intensity, just because of what we do and how we do it. And I was expecting him a little more, being how he is and who he is, to be more assertive about absolutely the inner life. He was kind of wondering too. It was a little vague, but that has always been the underlying premise, motive, whatever, is that, and I can't speak for the world, but it's trying to out my inner life in a way that makes...
That's certainly... my first exposure to you decades ago was Gutenberg elegies, and that sense...
Allergies.
Yes, that too. And that sense that we're, again, under threat. That the technology in one way, shape, or form is degrading the reading life, which of necessity degrades the inner life. And this book certainly carries through that with some of your thoughts on AI and writing.
Right.
Which I was like, that's That's of a piece. It's Sven got a Sven. He's and I'm totally with you. I was at this literary SF&F festival this weekend, and when I was coming back from dinner with one of my friends, he said, "What are you going to do?" I'm like, "I've got to go upstairs and finish tomorrow's guest's book." He said, "Oh, we've got a panel on use of AI in writing because apparently somebody is pro." And pretty much everyone here is con, and I'm dying to see how that panel goes, he said. I'm like, I haven't heard from him as to how it went, but it is certainly an extrapolation you couldn't even have imagined back in the 80s and 90s when you were first airing the alarm.
And the thing about it, in a way, the threat of it, as far as I'm concerned, is not some big switch is going to be thrown and everything is going to be suddenly digitally put together in some subtle way. But it's what comes in as a substitute, which they've very quickly been able to make moderately tolerable prose for whatever it is. But it's bringing in a lesser substitute at every point,
My long-standing take on it, long before ChatGPT, was that we're going to reach artificial intelligence more by lowering our standards as opposed to just the increase in technology. We'll start saying, well, that's close enough to human to fake it because
it's the close enough criterion.
And that we're lowering the quality of writing and the quality of thought that goes in. There's a stretch where lately I can discern it when people are sending, news releases or other things. I'm like, no. If this was read out loud, this would have a weird, voice box attached to it. There's something about this prose that isn't quite human. So,
well, I think it relates, if we can stretch an analogy. But you were talking about wanting to compile photos of the places in which your interlocutors are, and what you were sort of hinting at, or maybe you said, is just, you don't know what it is, but it's something elusive that you're getting. You're not saying that, but you're saying, this is sending me something about the person.
Yeah.
I see that as kind of emblematic of the kind of quality that is necessarily stripped away from anything generated by machine intelligence. And it's subtle because you can't necessarily say it. But if you're a reader who's learned over many years to kind of read for sound and sense and all the other aspects, you can tell. It's somehow barren. And that might work wonderfully in realms where, factual prose needs to be manufactured. But when we cross over into the terrain of the literary,
the imagination, and as you uniqueness and intention, as you bring up in one of the essays, to me, intention is the biggest key. Even you cite the AI that was playing Go against the world Go champion, and how it beats him multiple times. That system is not spending its off hours thinking about who it's going to play next.
Right.
Or how is it going to go after? All it is you turn this on and it has been trained on data, and it might come up with a strategy but it has no interest and no intention of its own. And that's still it can accomplish something, amazing, but it has no interest in doing so. Exactly. It's simply what it's built to do.
So in that match, there are two things that were the little points of fascination, or whatever, however you want to characterize it. One is, and they make a lot out of this, that the machine sort of had it in itself to decide to make an unprecedented move as opposed to whatever would have been in its repertoire of possibilities, which made a lot of people think, well, God, it does think. It thought enough to know to do something like that. And then the counterpoint is, there's only one game where he defeated the machine, and he did
the same thing. He came up with something that would be outside the...
Which is so strange.
It puts me in mind of the first time you and I sat down, which I think was 7 years ago, which is way too long. And we traded stories, I think off mic, about Chess Story by Stefan Zweig. Yes. And as I think about it, that sense of totally, incorporating and integrating a system into yourself, but not being able to see a world outside of it.
Yeah. Well, that's a book that I think, of course, that's where the Go section is sort of inspired by. It's this book called The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut.
I've heard it's great. I haven't read it yet.
It is. I mean, the Go thing is fascinating unto itself, but it's basically, over its pages, giving you a portrait, in a sense, of von Neumann, who everyone, basically says he's the smartest man in the world, and they, at some point, they kept him in a high security lockup with a bunch of guards just to make sure that nobody came in and tapped his intelligence, because he was behind everything, basically. But you see, there's not even there is a person, but the person is somewhere adjacent to the mental structure that he's walking around with. That has defined everything. He's able to look at things and, do that thing, which everyone finds so impressive. Mm-hmm. As one finds the guy who walks around in the park where there are all the chessboards set out.
And goes from table to table. And
can't even take it in, much less make it move. But he's already...
Yeah. Different sort of mind. And incredibly powerful, but limited.
Yes.
In different extents.
And not driven by any ethic, impervious to ethical concern in a way.
Have you seen anything from students? I assume anybody taking like the Bennington workshops is not submitting AI related text, but have there been?
Not, see, I've sort of...
You haven't been as connected. But,
I have. I stopped teaching basically about 7 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Up until then, that hadn't yet happened. People were more worried about plagiarism, cribbing from Middlemarch or something. But this is different. But
Casaubon was my favorite because he never actually produced anything. Yes. And I felt really seen when that happened. But anyway.
Well, you must have liked The Shining too.
Yeah. My wife not so much. But anyway, But and one of the things that I don't think we ever talked about, but really came out to me through this book. What did writing, how did that affect your writing?
Wow.
And I know it's not teaching, the workshop thing, but it's still that environment.
Yeah, I mean, I know what was the part that fascinated me. Not about teaching across the board, because I've taught in so many different ways, but the Bennington teaching, the workshop, and the fact that you have 5 students over the course of 6 months, and rather frequent interchanges. And I think the most important part of it for me was not what happened in the workshop, but what happened either before or after the workshop, when we would have an hour-long one-on-one, and the person was telling me what they wanted and started to fill my mind with, questions. It became, you got a first inkling in that conversation, then you began to see the work that is coming to you out of that basic premise. And then you start identifying. This is where you become not a therapist.
I was just going to say,
but in that mode, you are really thinking based on the evidence on the page. You're trying to do a Geiger counter thing of where does it light up? What's behind this? Awfully quiet about this, And so it becomes the process of probing and elucidating, but how that affects me.
What do you feed back into your own writing?
Yeah, well, not on the level of writing itself, but it made me so much more aware of barriers, baffles, things you've erected to stay away from something. Mm-hmm. And I've spent so much time with students trying to penetrate that it became more natural for me to question those in myself, and then to start to, and this is all when I'm writing personally, essayistically, not other modes, to try to do something about it. And so I'd say the writing that I've been doing the last years now, the analogy is very much I do a lot of drafts, and each draft is like pulling another thin sheet of transparency off of something. So each time you're getting closer, but it's still kind of shadowy behind it. But
my life is an open book written in invisible ink. That's my one of the haiku that I used in the last issue.
Yeah, for me, a lot. I mean, I know it is. It's finding a way to, in a larger, more comprehensive, both accurate and also accurately forgiving way, write about my relationship with my father. Which
I will say, Philip Lopate's introduction to the big personal essay collection saved me so much wasted time with his one line about the essay is not a place for score settling with your family.
Right.
I realized, nobody's interested in that. Okay, yeah, let me throw all these dad essays out the window. How do you approach that?
Well, I'm talking, sort of about a couple. Just psychologically owning up more accurately to ambivalences. Mm-hmm. Because in the earlier portrayal, you want to strike a sharper picture of a standoff, and that's always there. The standoff was there for 40 years, but in so many different modes. Overt, go to your room, to later, whatever. When you're 50 and you're still getting something.
Off mic, I will tell you a story about how that keeps holding up at 53 and 87 respectively.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So part of it is just not airbrushing that and not trying to stylize it into a conflict that is a simplification. Mm-hmm. The other thing, which has been really big, and this had to do with, so we moved here 3 years ago, concurrent, basically. My mother died in December of 2020. We moved here in February of 2021. And part of what I brought with me was an enormous miscellany of family things, including a lot of, old photos of the grandparent generation, and which then called up stories, because my mother was kind of a storyteller. She liked sort of spinning the past a little bit, but it came into view in a way that it hadn't come into view for the first 60-some years of my life. I mean, it was always there, and I knew the people, but now it kind of, the lens widened. It was like, what was that cinema thing called when I was a kid? CinemaScope, when it suddenly opened on the side.
That really narrow, wide angle.
So it's an analogous psychological feeling to that. It's you suddenly seem to be able to visualize and somewhat maybe imaginatively penetrate the historical space that was not accessible. And part of that is that I'm old enough and finally have gone through enough different life stuff to understand how to read those stories that my mother would tell. Which used to be just, simple. This happened, this person did this. But now I can, knowing a little about that person, maybe having known them when I was a child or young, I'm able to bring a more experienced lens to bear to understand things.
Did you need her to be absent for that? No, I don't mean it. Nay, did you need her to die before you could do this? But you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean.
Once you can no longer consult with her, or that possibility doesn't exist.
That was very big.
Yeah.
And it passed almost unnoticed, and it was a retro shock to realize that was the last person that I can go to ask about any of this. There's no one alive anymore who still had. They'd all sort of died off. And now she's gone too. Which it did. It made a kind of a liberation, but
Yeah,
also...
I'll say I recorded with the cartoonist Dan Clowes last year, and he'd mentioned at one point that his mother and his brother both died in recent years. And with that, he realized there was absolutely no one who knew anything about his childhood and upbringing left.
Yeah.
And it was... all the baggage was gone, and the reinvention in his 60s. You know, there's a sense of, I can be somebody, I'm liberated in a sense, because, you know, there's no longer anyone who can say that's not how it happened, or this is how I saw it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
anyway, so just getting at how all that, I guess the root question was whether teaching had influenced. Then I guess I went to suggesting that it opened me up to my own, what I was doing to others, I turned it around onto myself. And then with that, and I think very much with the deaths of the parents, a whole dimension opened up. You know, my father died 7 years ago. We had reconciled by then. We were okay. But... yeah, something happens. It's not just the severing of the connection, but when a person is suddenly removed.
You fill in the absence?
We do that a little, and I think it retroactively goes back like the ticket board at Grand Central. Retroactively affects everything that you've thought, known, believed, a little bit. It doesn't change it, but you suddenly see the person through the lens of their absence, looking back. And it's just very different from the lens that you have when they're sitting there yelling at you, or kvetching about something. So, yeah, it objectifies the utterly... it's totally subjective, but it objectifies it in a way that subjectively objectifies your life, that part of your life. And it also made me want to be getting at it. There was this sense, too, of these things are coming up in memory because they've been stirred up by old age, death, and all that went with it. But it's like there's so much. I keep having analogies. Now it's Mickey Mouse trying to paint, what was it?
The Fantasia?
Yeah, the Fantasia. It's like trying to stem before you lose it, you know. Yeah. So that's all coming. Those losses were pretty close by. Moved here, and then began going through the effects, old albums, and just finding things that just, wow, you know, that was my grandmother when she was young. You know, all of the things like that, which is because those are visual aspects, it's not cinematographic, but it's a different set of associations than a verbal story that you've heard. Exactly. Yeah. And it opens, yet other ways to color in the picture. You start
looking at the backgrounds of the pictures and figuring out what else was there.
Right. Those are more my wife.
I'll say the other thing that I wonder about, this is happening concurrently with you packing up your home and moving in your own, in a sense, as somebody who's lived in the same house almost for 53 years, I imagine for other people, there's a sort of post-mortem in that.
You're writing about that.
Yeah, you're de-accessioning, you're taking stock of everything as you moved everything out at the same time that you're coping in various ways with the loss of your mom.
And also, I'm still co-editing Agni, but I'm at a distance, and that whole shaping part of my Boston life is kind of there. It happens, mostly remotely, So parents gone, house gone, work connection changed, living in a new place. So it's been uprooted. I've liked it because it's been a trade up, visually. Just the countryside around here compared to Arlington Heights. It's just, it's great.
Yeah. But a significant change, an uprooting of things.
And, it happened I think I hit my 70 the first year when we were here in September. Yeah. So that's another little. No, oh my God!
Not little.
This.
Yeah, that's a milestone.
It is
to touch. You miss teaching?
That part that I was just describing, yes, and something I miss because I enjoyed. More than I enjoyed. I liked workshop. Workshop was a social game where you're trying to get at certain things. You know, I liked getting the packet, reading it, thinking about it, and then writing a coherent reply. And those replies, they were pretty. They're usually about 3 pages single spaced. Alongside all the little margin markings that you're sending back. But that was the sort of philosophizing the piece, and psychologically pushing and doing all that. I remember just how much I would wake up and know I had to write so-and-so's letter, and it was kind of like, oh, that's something interesting this morning, sit down and do that. So, yeah, that I do miss.
And the social aspect of being around the other writers? I met you through Gates was the guy. Yes. David Gates brought me up to Bennington the first time, and that led to...
a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. How's he doing?
He's okay.
He's on my postcard list, so I sent him a postcard a few months ago, but haven't heard back.
He's evolved a lovely sort of genial, curmudgeonly, scroungy-looking thing. But he did say, we're tangenting, but that's what these are in a sense, isn't it? Just
digressions and tangents. Yeah.
He finally, we were having a beer and I asked him how the work was going. And this is after having seen him several times in months previous. But finally, he had been on something and it just was not going. And this time, he had found a way to, the iceberg was moving again or whatever. And, but what did that come out of? What was...
Oh, the social.
Oh, the social.
Yeah.
I miss, yes, the old social. I don't know if you know how much, because it's more of a story, inside story, but Bennington
is having issues.
Completely changed.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just hurtful to people. It's not pretty. People who had been teaching there for 20 years were just knocked off. Susan Cheever didn't even get a response when she asked if she was coming back for a usual thing. No, and on and on. I mean, a lot of the top faculty in this great move to, make it a young program, which from following Instagram, it is now a young program. Everyone there is under 35.
It's the same thing I was alluding to with that festival that I'm at this weekend. This is airing 3 months after that, but I've seen this with a number of comics festivals also, where there's a reason I didn't go to the big one in Toronto this year. There's a couple people I wanted to record. I went last weekend in July instead of doing this in May because the festival itself, there were a few people I wanted to record with who live in Toronto that I could see anyway. And then I looked over everybody else. I'm like, I don't know who any of these people are. Everybody's under 35. I'm an old man now. I can't keep up. So.
Category you could almost label. Another threshold is the I don't know anyone-ism of getting older.
Yeah.
So true in the literary thing. I mean,
is it a challenge to keep up? I mean, it's a weird thing because...
Well, I don't have to, in a way.
Do you want to?
No, actually not. I've turned to the things that feed my thinking and my writing, and the whole idea is kind of that world. And I was in it for so long, the reviewing, getting things in on time, that kind of writing. I've discovered what I like, and to me the point, maybe not just of writing, but of living, is to achieve a durational sense of my day, of what I'm doing, because it's not interrupted. I'm not going to appointments. I mean, I'm here hugely by myself. I mean, my wife, we're much together here because we're married. And, but just kind of solitariness which when you ask that question about the social aspect, if I miss it nostalgically, but I'm not that social of a person anymore. I just am not.
It was a low residency program to begin with, so it was the getting together every few months, not a guy you're getting together with every week for, hanging out, having a beer down the street or whatever.
Yeah.
This is my social life, as you know.
Yeah, it's a good choice.
What's interesting to me is the repeat guests like you, because Lopate and I have done 4 over 10 years, and they've really captured each of us as 10 years have gone by in certain ways. Yeah. And that's been one of those, continuity. And this is a nice replacement for friends. Because this way none of you have to get too bored by my, incoherent stories.
I'm concealing my extraordinary boredom as I sit here. So God.
He never stops with the droning. But yeah, the what do you miss and what does it turn out you don't miss, I think has been, a lesson of...
I mean, there used to be for so long, it's the whole spark of social interaction is that it's multi-directional. I mean, you go to something, you're talking to a lot of people, you're waving it.
Yeah.
And at a certain stage, that's great. That's what you want. You're still trying to also feel your way up into what you're aspiring to. And if you go to literary events, it's full of, that kind of covert ambition, chasing guy. I should go over and talk to him, but in an excited way. Now when I picture that, I've gone from multi to one-on-one, and I love having my one-on-ones with, a handful of people that I see where we just sit down and just talk, associate, do this kind of thing.
Until some guy puts a couple of microphones on the table, make you self-conscious, but,
Yeah, I forgot that's what we were doing, but now you reminded me.
Oh, jeez. I've always had that great moment with a couple of guests, even though there's all this paraphernalia in front of us where they're like, I kind of forgot there were microphones here. I'm like, okay, that means I did my job. So, I'll ask, in relation to that what an absence means. You have one of the essays goes into writers' homes and the...
Yes.
What does it mean? And how you're not a pilgrim for the other writers' homes. You had the line that writers' homes are largely about the myth of inspiration, which I get. The idea that, this desk is somehow the Sven desk where X, Y, and Z was written is not... I get why there's a compelling thing for people. Writers' graves. Artists' graves.
They're more...
As opposed to the ornate ones, like going to see Oscar Wilde's in Lachey's.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking of a specific cemetery in Concord, which has Thoreau, it has Emerson, various others. I guess you go to a writer's desk, but you want to just get a hint of the magic of what the work was. When you stand in front of a grave, you can't help but think, well, this is where it ends up.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The sense of the finality
Never mind
might
the
be more
beautiful
meaningful.
words, but there's that slab of stone.
I went to record with Daniel Mendelssohn back in 19, and my thing was, once we finish up, I'm going to go check out Philip Roth's grave. Well, we're here, because writer who meant a lot to me in particular, but similarly, when I did one with Ross Benjamin over in Nyack about his Kafka book, I was like, Edward Hopper is buried up the hill? Hell yeah, I'm going up and finding that. But
it's interesting.
I don't know why.
The transaction that was going on when you arrive, it's not, Jacob Smith, 1876, it's Edward Hopper, blah, blah, blah. What are you bringing to that contemplation?
Yeah, I don't know.
Or is it just a form of honoring the fact that they were, and you kind of stand inside the
and our lives
are
such scavenger hunts also. And we'll talk about Instagram and what that whole world has done to us. The chasing those things. And years and years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I had a biotech show up in San Francisco, rented a convertible, drove down to San Diego to see friends, and on the way, stopped at the Henry Miller Museum in Big Sur, stopped in Oxnard, where two of my favorite cartoonists grew up, stopped near Venice Beach, where Ted Hawkins used to busk out on one of the corners, and thought, those are weirdly, my kind of literary scene.
So it just intensifies the association you already carry, but suddenly it magnifies it by presence, sort of.
There's a sense of, sometimes it's the wanting to see or get a sense memory of what that environment was like. Other time, I mean, for me, if I ever get to France to see Montaigne's library, yes, I will make the trip. Or southern Italy to go to Lampedusa's, the estate that inspired Donna Fugata.
I know that's such a huge book for you. I love that book too. It's been many years, but it just hit historical.
Some books you have to get at the right time. But the sense of artistic play is sometimes meaningful, but I don't have the... When Philip Roth's estate was for sale, at no point was I thinking, if I buy one of these things through alchemy, I will begin writing X, Y, and Z.
Right.
Seeing his lectern at the the Philip Roth Public Library in Newark, interesting. Seeing his Eames chair, interesting, but not one of those. This is somehow going to transfer something. But the graves thing, it struck me as a neat contrast that the grave is the end of the conversation. That might be more meaningful to see a resting place instead of a writing place.
And the grave, more than the desk, raises the big question of the worth of what has been done. Because there you are, you lived your life, and you did this stuff, and here it is in front of us in the air, sort of. It is finally a positive feeling. It's not, what's the word? Anyway, it's not a
deflating
a deflating. What's the point? It's rather it slightly underscores the point because you contrast. I'm sorry. But you contrast it with the grave of somebody else beside, who probably has all their own stuff, but you don't know it. And here you kind of know what you're being responsive to or reverential toward. And it matters. It matters. The fact that you're there standing makes it... establishes the fact that it was worthwhile for that person to have done what they did because they reached someone. And that person is now standing in the place.
My last trip to Amherst, November 22, I accidentally stumbled across Emily Dickinson's grave. After 4 years of college here, where I'd never thought to look for that in a million years, it was just walking down the street and seeing some old cemetery. I'm like, let me go see if there's something I can draw over there. And then it was, oh my God, there's Emily Dickinson's grave. And I've never really read Emily Dickinson. I should go buy a collection while I'm here. And now every day is 2 pages, and the previous day is 2 pages to try to make sense of it.
It's funny, one of my closest friends and somebody who makes living here much more pleasant socially is this writer Chris Benfey, and he's basically, he started off as a Dickinson scholar, and this town is Dickinson ridden. Every road is Dickinson Road. But that, speaking of writers' houses, that house has been there for 3 years. I've never had the slightest impulse to pull over and go in and see. Just don't. I can't. I don't know why. But
the grave, though? Pretty neat.
I've been to the grave.
That's what I'm saying. There's more interest in this is where she ended up. And this is the whole context around her. The other fun essay in the book for me was the author photos thing, also because back when I was 18 or 19, my subconscious pulled the funniest joke on me of all time, which was a dream I had when Thomas Pynchon's Vineland was coming out. I dreamed that I found the book in a bookstore. I went to the back cover, the inside flap copy, where there was an author bio and a photo of an empty room. And I was like, well, my subconscious knows how to mess with me on this Pynchon thing. It gave me, here's your author photo. There's no one there. It was... I had a good laugh when I woke up and realized what it was. But
I see the book behind.
No, there is no author photo. There's nothing. Okay. There's a man who isn't there. But the sense of image and what artists mean to us based on that versus
And I also think it has a lot to do with the years of formation when you make you trim down and sort of fashion your private romanticism, which could be broad and general, and then it starts to sharpen down, and then there become the people who represent it in one way or another, and they fascinate you just to look at their faces, and
Orwell and Miller were my two guys through college, and that
Miller
was
very big for me.
I remember I saw him in the book, and that was
When I lived in Cambridge, Cambridge and Ann Arbor for a long time, and it was totally corny, but I had pictures that I thought were just interesting faces of writers, but everywhere I moved, they would be pinned up in front of me, and they were some of the weirdest people. I mean, Miller was there, and Lawrence, and Giuseppe Ungaretti, and just oddball people. But there's something, the visual, the physiognomy, the fizz.
Collect old books? I mean, like editions and manuscriptions. Has that ever been a thing for you?
Well, I was in the business.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And it was a thing. Yes, there was a period when I was, totally obsessed with finding modern firsts. And this is when I was living in Ann Arbor mainly. And
but for business as opposed to personal?
Well,
did you want them for yourself?
I co-managed this Charing Cross bookshop in Ann Arbor for a while. And during that time, I was, just in the world of catalogs, values, books, book sales, and sure, I started amassing things. I decided I wanted to leave Ann Arbor and move east, and I didn't really have employment. What I had was a box full of first editions, and there used to be, and probably still is, something called the ABA Bookman's Catalog, where every week people list their stuff and the prices. And so I brought that box and I opened up, I used to call it Palinurus Books. And I think for 3 or 4 months I was, doing very well.
Sure.
But I was also hoping to keep supplementing it by going around the area. And that was okay for a little while, but that started to taper off, and finally I'd pretty much sold off. I mean, I've got a couple cool things, but I don't collect.
Yes, that's what I'd wonder, whether it was more for a commercial
but
transactional thing versus
but I could see with the right slight change in disposition, I could imagine myself, at least at that mentality of my life, becoming a collector of modern firsts, modernist writers, and getting deep into it, looking for the best edition, the inscription, blah, blah, blah.
That was my antiquarian book fair moment when I realized I wasn't that guy, when I saw Orwell's inscribed edition of Inside the Whale to Anthony Pohl. And I thought, if I were that guy, I would go get $15,000 and buy this, but I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I now understand firmly. It's very nice that this exists. There's no reason for this to be in my home, as resonant as all three elements of that are. Right. No,
all these things, they're symbolic too, in a way of one's changing inner profile. But I've always been, very curatorial, or I was for a long time with my books, and God forbid I should ever do anything more than touch a pencil pinpoint next to a passage. And I forbid underlining, but now I just...
Are you a dog ear, or you...
I dog ear, and the vertical stripe.
Okay.
But that used to be a taboo, and I crossed the line. I don't know what it meant that I crossed it, but I did. I suddenly said, it's just a book, kind of thing.
No, I'm with you. It's my fear, because I've seen books from like 1991 that I did underline and write notes next to, was
in big pen.
And how facile my thinking was. That's what I really don't want to see, is to be reminded of how shitty a thinker and reader I was back then. So
Good point.
Yes, I just dog ear now with the, maybe I'll figure out what caught my eye on this page.
The best.
And
Actually, that's
be
better.
The re-engineering. But yeah.
Because that makes you go in with the question again.
As I have numerous dog ears in your book right here. So we'll talk about photography and your changing approach to photography, the digital world, Instagram, and what it does to how you see. Tell me about learning to see again.
Yes. Well, I do it. There is that essay, Double Take, which is very much about that. And it characterizes me, again, as somebody who, if I go into deep history, my grandfather, who was a painter, but he also had a photo studio in Riga. He was a photographer. I was always keenly aware of photographs. And then I mentioned in there that when I was in high school, there was a boarding student whose name paradoxically was, or not, Mark Cannon. And he was a total photo nut. And so I would spend a lot of time just hanging out with him because you could smoke in the dark room. It's the only place in the school where there's fans, So I'd be down there a lot and just watching it happen. The bath. I think it all comes down to the
chemical.
The chemical bath and the emergence. Not the arrival, but the emergence of the image. But then the question comes up, well, if I'm so interested and if this is so intriguing, why don't I get a camera and, go with it, do it, learn it? Laziness and a huge inner obstacle about things with moving parts.
Yeah.
I realized that there's a whole world of lore, not just lore, but, of craft technique. In order to be really good, you'd learn how to do this and that and dodge and then burn. And I was just too lazy. I said, I don't want to do that. So, years went by. I was just somebody who liked photographs. And then, as I do right there also, but given an iPhone, first iPhone, didn't think of it as having a photo option on it for a while. It was just a phone. Then discovered that there was that option and then played with it. And in the moment of digital play, it just came again. We're Cinerama again. It opened
up perspective.
And suddenly, I suddenly saw how interesting it is to locate what it is that you want to take, and then to frame it, and then it's very much dialing in what your sensibility is about. You pick that wagon over by the barn. You don't pick the beautiful tree that day or whatever. So why the wagon? Why the barn? What is it that's the... And there are various things that it has brought forward in me. I definitely know that many of the things I take have to do with the natural aptitude I have, or a quality, which is being a nostalgist. Things that they're not like antique things, but they're things on the verge of getting
obsolete,
lost in the old analog,
Yeah.
But they're still there and they still stand for that. I like weathered things, as you probably have noticed. Mm-hmm. And then what for me, the thing that became instructive for me is my discovery that the most interesting things that I ended up taking were not things I went to with intent. They're always accidental, arbitrary, peripheral. And I developed a theory of the peripheral intelligence is, in some ways, visually much more developed than we think. I don't know if you experience this, maybe everyone does. You're going somewhere, and from a distance, it's really a mop with the shirt thrown over it and something else down the sidewalk. you've spotted it and you've fashioned it into something that it's not.
There is a trail near us that there's a tree stump that we always mistake for a bear cub. And it's always that moment. No, but this is the same spot. It's not a bear. Let's just keep going, and we're good.
It's the speed with which the eye works to create that impression, but it's the same eye that is doing that as the eye that's capable of noticing something over there that's out of the norm, that just stands out for some reason. Why is that, blue box in the middle of the field? I don't know, whatever. Yeah. And I realized that was going hand in hand with where I felt I was trying to take and was taking my writing. But and we talked about Nabokov back when, but the huge lesson from him was to trust what to the world may seem trivial, but which has imprinted itself in your memory, to trust that and follow it. And he does that constantly throughout Speak Memory. Just, it's the smallest thing. It's the way his governess braided her hair, so he remembers it there in the sun by the window or whatever. He doesn't, on paper, he doesn't give you that much else about all the standard stuff of life, the studium
your
of
line
it all.
From the essay was the general with the wooden matches or something, and
General Kuropatkin,
and his wooden matches stick out in this young Nabokov's mind, and yet the war itself
exactly
gets nothing because you're a kid and this is what you focus on.
Yeah, so what it gives you is not at that moment the importance of the event. It gives you the most crystallized possible glimpse of the sensibility of the child at that age. Yeah. You're suddenly, a 6-year-old boy or whatever, watching this guy playing with matches and being riveted. That tells you so much more. But
written with a mature Nabokovian prose, as opposed to trying to replicate.
Yeah. Exactly.
The mind of the 6-year-old or the telling. But
so peripherality is very interesting to me. And the stuff I'm writing now, I'm doing these things, have been for a while, called Sketches from Memory. And they're short, 3-4 page things selected from all parts of my life. Writing about myself in my grandparents' kitchen one summer. I'm writing about waiting for the guy from the funeral parlor to come and wheel my mother out. So it's the span, and there's not a story. The story is just in the itemization of moments. But one thing I discovered in the writing, and I sort of write about it a little bit, is the smaller. What fascinates me most, what I find most exciting writing that kind of prose, is when I can find the smallest possible thing that will open out into the biggest possible thing. So the red button on the sofa, nothing could be smaller than that, but somehow you have a way of going in on it. It ends up being about the afternoon, your family is there and something horrible happened, whatever. But the red button had to be a realistic prompt. It couldn't be, figured out, I'll just throw a red button in. And that's where the whole memory thing, it just opens up and up and up. And with that, we're back to the question, the inner life, the inwardness, and it is at that point also, it's the problem of other minds, no matter what. I have no idea of the extent, depth, scale of your inwardness. I can make certain guesses now based on what I hear you say, know that you read, how you talk. But, for the person, I could go to the person next door. I lived 2 or 3 years. Nothing.
It's the ineffability of human experience.
It is.
That we can't get across what really goes on inside our heads to anyone else.
Exactly.
Barely to ourselves.
Yeah. but it is another one of the underwriting things of the why write question. It's not just, well, it's a private excavation always, but you hope to present it in such a way that it will illuminate you to anyone who cares to read it and respond to it. But it's a showing via these kinds of things. And with the writers that I really respond to as writers who inspire me, they're the ones who can do that, almost to a person. They have a way, with a moment, a detail, and a presentation of whatever it is, that I can feel that it's coming out of their larger life, their larger being. I think that came up too. You were talking about that a little bit about painting, I feel.
I'm put in mind of Donald Hall's One Road essay, which very much, it's an annual reading for me. It's my kickoff for Yom Kippur is to start with that and then read a Bruce J. Friedman story about violating Shabbat. But the sense of...
Yeah, I mean...
everything is a very particular story about him and his first wife, and then at the very end you get the universal...
Yes.
Of there are no happy endings, because if things are happy, they haven't ended.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, writers you wish wrote more essays, as opposed to novelists or poets who, like Donald Hall, boy, his prose was really, really good. I kind of wish he...
I mean, well, some of them are no longer with us. I could...
Yeah, writers you wish you had.
Endlessly read essays by Sebald. I like the much maligned Peter Handke in that.
I've never read him, and I'm only 800 pages left in Knausgaard, and Handke has come up, and I'm in the he was the guy with the he had the problem. Right. He was problematic after the Nobel thing.
And he became kind of a no. Just you never see him mentioned, given the extent of his actual literary prominence. It's just Knausgaard himself. I loved his...
My Struggle is what I'm in the midst of.
But he's got several books of essays, the 4 seasonal ones, spring, summer.
On my list, but not for 24.
And then there's one that I recently got, which I like quite a lot. They're, miscellaneous essays, but they're very much of the sensibility of our times and of someone who struggles with them. And then I picked up, he has a book devoted just to Edvard Munch. Yeah. And he writes beautifully just about appreciating and looking at paintings and the nuances of how things come to...
And that comes up in, I think, the first book of My Struggle. He writes about Munch in a very essayistic way that's... when I started reading more about... I went to Knausgaard 10 years later than everyone else because I refuse to read anything that's Au Courant. Which is why I'll get to Ferrante in a couple of years. I figure that's once nobody talks about her whatsoever.
Yes,
I'm good.
I haven't gotten there myself.
But yeah, starting to read My Struggle and then go read about Knausgaard. I'm like, the Munch thing is clearly his art history, and there's essays around this. But yeah.
Yeah, so...
It's been an interesting process diving into that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's one of those put you on the spot questions.
I know.
I like certain, voices, sensibilities. I could read Vivian Gornick. I could read... I'm off. I never really was fully on, maybe a little bit. No Sontag. I'm post-Sontag.
She's a huge hole in my reading, and I know how important she is, but I just never picked her up in college, and I kind of never...
It's a funny thing, because, she did enough and lasted enough and had enough variables come together to make her an emblem.
Yeah.
You know, and that I notice now has happened on Instagram. You know, if you just go to the little Paul Auster, you know.
Yeah.
So many great writers have died, and even the recently compromised Alice Munro, she died about the same time Auster did. When you go through those clips, it's always Auster.
The author, as we talked about, the author photo is meaningful, and the male author photo.
The male author photo, yeah. But I've been liking Elizabeth Gabbert. She's interesting. I want to get, but I haven't, because my reading life is it's complicated because I can't read too much print on paper. I just had a eye thing, and when I came back from it, it was what was it called?
Astigmatism? Cataract?
No, this was
something weird.
It was kind of like, it wasn't a stroke, but it was suddenly Bell's palsy. I got it pretty bad a year ago. You know, I went around for months with a patch. I couldn't really drive for a while. And, when I emerged from it, it's like I only emerged 3/4 of the way. I didn't emerge back into what I had been. So, you know, I have to struggle to, you know, I can read 5-6 pages in a row decently, but I'm concentrating in a way I didn't used to. I read things on screen. I listen to things, you know.
I take my contact lenses out. You know, they're dailies, and it's one of those, I have to commit as to whether I'm going to do a lot of reading that day or not.
Right.
Or I'm going to draw and get up close to the paper, and I can't do that with the contacts in. So it's it's all the internal stupidness of trying to figure out what's, you know.
It is, but that's how we are. It's true.
A few of the essays go into your concerns about, they come out of lockdown, and the concerns of what that might trigger in day-to-day life for people, whether the shift to remote becomes something more significant.
Yes.
We'll pretend we're post-pandemic. I was just at a festival where they were masked 100%, and that's admirable. Not saying revising, but looking at those essays and what you were concerned with, you know, what's your take by 2024?
Yeah, no, right now, I mean, I think it's...
because I'm glad to do these in person again instead of remote. Like we did remote for Speak Memory, and that's fine.
That's right.
But it's not the same as...
I think it did two things at once as a larger phenomenon. I mean, first, there's a certain wave, and possibly, you know, substantial, I don't know, but people in quarantine are driven back upon themselves, but they're also driven deep into digital alternatives communication. I think a lot of people upped their online significantly, their whole immersion in that.
Everybody was watching Tiger King. Everybody had a Netflix thing going. Those first few months were in particular, you know.
So now that we're out of it...
air quotes, yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to answer because...
For some people, there was as there has been for me, thank God we can get together in person again. Mm-hmm. Oh, but it's nice to have the occasional, virtual meeting as an option when necessary.
I think that was another divider when I was talking earlier about all those things that were simultaneously happening concurrent with the move and turning 70. We moved early COVID, fairly early COVID. And that too, that the old house represented kids, friends of kids, people we knew in Cambridge and Boston. And then the dimming of that socially, as had to happen, and then coming out here and just completely desocialized for a while. We weren't in quarantine, but it's just we didn't know anybody.
You're not getting out and meeting people as vaccine rollout is happening, outside of meeting people standing in line to get a shot.
Right.
Yeah.
So many things. And then, you just, one personally asks whether these are the things that have made me be the way I am or feel currently, or these things happened, but I was going in that direction anyway.
Yeah.
Whether I was shaped or I just, I would be something like this no matter what.
Do you believe man can change?
Yeah. I mean, depends on the extent.
Only for the worse?
No.
I'm kidding.
No. I think there's so many instances in literatures full of them where one, is a certain way and then is able to move into, through some accident occurrence, into an ethical comprehension of what formerly was just, your ambitious life, doing this and that. Suddenly something happens and it's like, oh yeah, I think that's a change that can and should happen more often. It's sort of I haven't read Kierkegaard in eons, but that was sort of...
You do bring up the importance of forgetting in the book, so I'm assuming you've read Kierkegaard sometime in recent history.
But, it's
burrowed into your brain and you haven't forgotten it. But yeah.
It was the idea. I was less interested in the stages of the transition into the religious. I never got there, but from the sort of aesthetic, the seducer, whatever, into the ethical stage. That's a legitimate and hoped for change. I don't know that we're necessarily selfish creatures, that we are left to our own formation, whether ethics is given to us as part of our package or whether it really is shaped into you. Certainly instruction, parents, you must never do this, you must not, but that's coming from the outside. But the inner development of that way of looking and of comprehending, so much of it just really has to do with making that leap into recognizing the other person, sort of I thou kind of it's, again, I don't know if empathy is given also in our genetic package, or it's something that life teaches us, or we resist and don't have it, like somebody we know in near high office.
Yeah. I think this has changed me. I think doing this for 12 years.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
I've learned to listen, and learned to listen to what's not being said in a way that I don't think I was.
Yeah.
Not to say I wasn't capable of, but simply had never done.
Yeah. If it's not a requirement of the day or whatever, it's not the first thing you do. But the listening thing, that's so big.
And it's you write about it in relation to the essay writing also, and the photography. It'll sound base, but the search for clues.
Yes.
You're being a detective / therapist.
Yes.
In every moment.
It's a double impulse. There's the search for clues, which already sort of posits the idea that there's something to be found in whatever it is, whether it's your own
Charles Portis in the lockbox and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But the other element, this friend I mentioned that lives here in town, we had a project that went on for a year, and we're both writing daily at length in response to each other on the core root word, question, concept of serendipity. Mm-hmm. And actually, it was an enormous thing. Some parts got published, but serendipity, which, there's clues, and then there's, as we said earlier, things that enter your awareness. They enter it seemingly out of nowhere, but they enter it because you're ready to see that thing and not those other things. And it feels like serendipity because it connects with whatever's going on. And you say, oh, wow, I just thought about it. Yeah. And so that plus clues, those two together, I think they are the things that keep writing alive for me, in the sense that they keep it at some level, the whole need and prospect and doing of it, a mystery, the mysteries of writing.
Maybe less clue, more pattern forming.
Possibly.
I use clues just because of that Austerian, detective motif.
But it's one of I've cited it probably too often in things I've written. It's a moment which is just so important for me. It's in The Moviegoer, that book?
Yeah, Walker Percy?
Yes, yeah. And Binks Bowling wakes up one morning. It's when he realizes that he's on the search. He identifies that he's on a search. And what it is, he's standing in front of his bureau, as I remember, and there are all these objects there. It connects him back with the moment that he suddenly remembers as a kind of flashback, probably Korea, maybe? A battlefield moment. It was not that anything happened. It was a moment where he was face down in the dirt and could see, a large beetle or something going by in front of him. And he sort of got, I don't know how to characterize it. It was like suddenly the thingness of, things or whatever.
The epiphany of something.
It was a way of he hadn't looked at the world quite in that way, and suddenly it's just going there right in front of his eyes. And he's fascinated, and he's kind of alerted to the idea that, to his existence, and then what that existence then, I suppose this is where Kierkegaard ties in, because he was a big Kierkegaard reader. And so I think the search that Binks identifies and puts himself on really is a search through the sort of more detached aesthetic outlook on the world to one that begins to find its way into emotion, responsibility, empathy, all that.
You think about religion?
Not in a religious way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about the things that religion is about constantly. And I would, if you absent religion itself, I'd say I'm a religious person.
The spiritual versus religious.
Yeah. And this was, was I listening?
It must have been one of my shows. I just don't remember any of them.
I think it was one of your shows where somebody was saying how hard it is to use, or even, to use the word soul in the contemporary world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's seen as like some kind of throwback, crackpot, wee-wee, woo-woo business. And this connects now to the idea of the inner life. Yeah. When your inner life is there for you and preoccupies you, I feel it in terms of, a soul. It's not a soul that's an immortal soul, but it's something more than a sum of its awarenesses and perceptions. It is an entity. I guess it is the I that's somewhere buried in this cumbersome frame, Yeah. So that's where religion. I grew up in a secular house. I used to always think it was very interesting to be able to tell people that I'd never set foot in a church in my life.
Outside of people's funerals or something. But
really, the only times I did go into a church was for the most secular reasons. It was my father doing an architectural assessment, looking at stuff, and I'm walking around with him or behind him. But as for what the church was for, what people did in there, it's like a sauna or something.
Are there ways that his architecture and the principle of architecture informs?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
I assume you've written about it, and I'm just blanking. But
no,
okay.
I don't think I have.
This may be part of what you're working on in future. I get.
One more working on the relational stuff, but I'm very aware of it in what my eye is drawn to pictorially. I am drawn to the same kinds of forms. You know, you take a picture of something and then you have to make it
the
into
photos of your
present.
Your dad's architecture have that geometric quality to it that I see in some of your, especially the high contrast black and white.
Yeah.
Anything with a structure, you find ways that seem to mimic, resemble.
And see, I don't know if that's from him or whether it's just the natural thing of growing up in a modernist house with a modernist architect where everything around me had a modernist sort of clean lines. And, you know, that was just what I saw. Yeah. No clutter, is just that kind of stuff. And so now when I'm driving along and suddenly I see a configuration of barns in a silo or something, what I'm seeing before anything else is the possibilities of that arrangement of shapes and what can be done with it, how to frame it, how to bring something forward. And it's very architectural, so there is that.
Yes. We don't escape our parents.
We don't. I don't know if it informs writing itself in terms of structure. I think it's too different.
Yeah, it seemed like a stretch for me to pitch, but I'm glad it still led somewhere.
When my dad was working at home, he just played Bach all the time, because Bach gave him the feeling of structure, and that's what he was kind of, the world he was in, you know.
Reminds me of the Tree of Life, that Terrence Malick.
Oh yeah, long ago.
Speaking of long ago, in the last essays in the book, you're writing about Dylan. Mm-hmm. In 2006, it's stated. You refer to him as late middle-aged when he was 65, which I thought was very optimistic of you.
Optimistic. God.
Because that was my moment of, I have to go to the end of this one to figure out when he's writing this. I think Dylan is a little bit beyond middle age, but whatever. You write about, the image of him, the sense of masks, we'll say, apparently candid Dylan in No Direction Home, where he's being interviewed by Scorsese off screen. How has your conception of Dylan changed in the 15 years or so as he goes through 80, as you go through 70, as America changes?
Yeah, I think
Does your Dylan keep transforming?
Well, I think I just stopped being very interested in what was coming out after Love and Theft. Mm-hmm.
And Murder Most Foul.
But
Murder Most Foul. Go get the album with the 17-minute History of America and murder song.
But I have, and this doesn't figure anywhere in that piece, but I played guitar for eons. I left it sit in its case for eons. Since I've moved out here, it's been a natural thing I go to because I have time and solitude. And
no neighbors to complain.
No neighbors. And so I've been playing guitar a lot. And when the guitar playing I learned that, I grew up in the folky culture. That was what I aspired to, folk blues and all that. And now when I'm playing, I just sit there and, suddenly hit a few notes that remind me of a song, and then I'll try to do the song. But Dylan has come in through the back door. Yeah. I'm just playing something, I suddenly realize those are the two chords that I need for Just Like a Woman. And then I start playing that, messing around with. But I'm doing a lot of it, Sad-Eyed Lady suddenly came to me. And so Dylan of the era of my coming up has re-entered. And I just, he transcends an opinion. He's just so many.
I had wondered, I was watching Series of Dreams, the video they did for Series of Dreams many years ago, and wondered of any, we'll say artist of whatever stripe in our era, is there anyone who has as many personae eras and phases and ways of being seen by others. There was Bowie,
yeah,
but those were more
just thinking
controlled.
he was a minimal version of that.
But with Dylan, it didn't seem there was a precedent for being that multiple selves.
Totally fascinating. I have it somewhere on my phone, but my friend Osgold out in Boston, the guy who founded Agni, he sent over a little text clip or an e-clip. It's about 15 minutes long. I don't know why he picked this. I know he likes Dylan, but he's not a Dylan
As you put, not the guys who were compiling set lists and things like that.
Not Christopher Ricks.
Yeah.
So he sent me this, maybe a 15-minute clip, and it's basically a visual biography of Dylan, starting with, little Dylan at home, Dylan in Dinkytown, Dylan in the village, Dylan with his guitar, Dylan with Joan, Dylan with Sarah, Dylan, older Dylan after his accident. But when you anything like that,
the biography becomes, whether it's false or not, the biography becomes mythology to us in an American way that we don't have an awful lot of artists.
No, we don't.
We do that with.
The image selection is obviously driven by the person's desire to at least make a nod to every one of the Dylan's faces and stages that he could, And it makes you realize, and there's always the question within that, so where's Bob? And he's there. I just so wonder about Bob in his kitchen in the morning.
Well, that was, again, part of what you get at in the interviews from, again, 2005 or so, where it's an older guy with jowls who's just kind of, I don't know if he had the pencil-thin mustache back then.
I think he did.
But it reminds me, it was a Batman comic from the 90s, a sort of high-end prestige one that one of my past guests painted. And there's this moment where he's essentially captured by all of his enemies, his rogues gallery in the asylum. And one of them says, take off his mask, I want to see his face. And the Joker says, that is his face.
Right.
There's nothing underneath this. Where with Dylan, you get at the sense of
well, the faces,
whether there's something, or whether that something is the interaction of man and audience.
But there's this something that forms the often extraordinary content of the songs, which testifies that they're coming out of a place that is probably shielded and masked with barricades of public self. But that's why I wonder, Dylan in his kitchen. Is he thinking, well, I'm 81 or whatever he is, and had a hell of a life. I don't know if he's with someone. He probably is. I don't know if he's living in a trillionaire's house or just... He's probably pretty well set up.
Yeah, royalties out the wazoo.
Okay.
Not too many divorces. That's...
Anyway, Well,
what the day-to-day life is like. A friend of mine knew one of the Ramones who... he asked him, so when you, go grocery shopping with your wife, do you push the cart? He's like, I can't, man. I'm a Ramone. She has to push it because people are looking. If I'm standing there pushing a shopping cart in the Long Island supermarket,
that is just...
Yeah, that's a little different. That's that public,
but,
persona.
If you spend enough time sort of spotting and chasing the public people that interest you, you very quickly realize you don't want to have maybe some of their achievement or something kindred. You don't want to have that life. You do not.
I'll tell you a story off mic about some of this stuff. But
you save those up now.
Yeah, and that could go into the book too. We'll see. Milton Glaser gave me an idea for a book to do around the podcast, which I'll have to contemplate if I ever reach... Well, you're about 20 years older than me. If I reach your age and I'm able to finally slow the fuck down and take stock of this instead of making 50 of them.
It's not that you slow down. You get slowed down.
Yeah. Yeah, there's that.
And this part of it's just, you're good with repetition while you have a certain kind of energy. When that energy leaves, the repetition starts to become
formal
and oppressive, and you start avoiding things that were once just natural because it's like, oh, am I going to go with that again?
Listen, I got to edit this week's show sometime, and usually I do that on a Sunday, but today I'm doing this, and it's Monday morning before I know it's going to be Tuesday up until the last second, and then do an introduction over lunch and post the episode. But yeah, we get a little. As one of my tutors at St. John's sent me a letter about a year or so ago. Someone had told him the difference between a rut and a grave is the depth.
Huh.
Yeah. That was my moment of,
yeah,
maybe I need to change things up a little bit. But, I can't stop doing this because if it weren't for this, I wouldn't meet you. I wouldn't meet people who, helped change my life and between the books and the conversation. So
that's been the huge part of entering the so-called literary life, apart from the fact of the writing, is that you're in touch so often with like-minded, interesting people. Whether it's an editor or an agent or somebody who read your book and is writing to you or something, but you've created a circle of affinity sort of by that practice, and keeps life interesting.
That's why I keep doing all this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to end up driving 5.5 hours today between all the other stuff I'm doing, but it's all worth it.
What do you listen to when you drive?
I just put on Sirius Radio. I'd never listen to podcasts. I don't even listen to mine. I listen to First Wave, so I get like early 80s new wave hits. And then there's a story it was either an introduction or a newsletter. I was coming back from Old Haddam, East Haddam, Connecticut, and was crazy traffic on a Sunday. Tremendous podcast with Bill Griffith that day, but I was, what should have been maybe 2 hours is going to be 3.5.
Right.
And I was losing my mind, changing station after station after station. And then I thought, Gil, you've never actually listened to the Grateful Dead in your life. Just put on the Dead station, because all those songs are probably going to be 15 minutes apiece. And if you tell yourself you're not going to change the station, the miles will go by. And they did. I learned some stuff. You
didn't become a deadhead.
No, near the end, when I was about 10 miles from home, they had one of their programs begin. It was this day in Grateful Dead history or whatever it was. Yeah. That got a little tedious because the DJ just started giving like the set list factual thing. And I was in the, not my world, but I appreciated the music for, it made that trip work. But it's all music, maybe a baseball game if something's going on. But that's what I'll be doing on this drive, because it never occurs to me that I should call someone and have a conversation while driving, because this is my form of conversation.
It's a little less frequent now, but all through last year, I drive to Boston. Initially, it was like once a week. I drive in on a Wednesday, and so it was 2 hours there, 2 hours back. And that's where I discovered, after I'd played all my favorite hits for a couple drives, I started, that's when you were a frequent companion, because it would maybe the whole drive out.
Yeah, about an hour plus you can get. And this one's, we're already an hour and 35, so somebody's going to enjoy this for a longer drive.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Stuck in the L.A. freeway.
Or Boston traffic.
Apparently the worst in America.
It's god-awful. I hate Boston, just for the driving aspect of it. But,
all that, yes.
I got to stay away from it this time. So, you listen to me and we'll say my guests.
Well, then I do the other thing, which is I think, and this is where I, betray you and stray from you sometimes. I just think of minds that I want to hear for an hour plus, and initially there are a lot of them, drill off 20 people that, just driving, listening to them being interviewed by somebody. Then it starts to, I said, geez, who else is, there's it's got to be interesting enough to
keep you engaged,
me going for an hour and a half, let's say.
Yeah.
And I've gone to a lot of ones that I would think, God, this should be promising. And sometimes, the person obviously is, they're brilliant and interesting. But, I remember listening to a podcast with, I think it was Ann Carson. And, oh, this will be good. And it was so ordinary. Whoever it was keeping her in her ordinary and not
finding the window,
pushing the buttons or whatever.
Yeah. That's what I try. You are the first guest in a couple of weeks who hasn't cried while we're talking. So that's.
I'll start. You can see what you can get on me.
I did bring up your mom. I thought that might do it, but no. As it turns out, you're. We'll keep the impenetrability going. Mm-hmm. Enjoy the hell out of the Miro Worm, but I am looking forward to the sketches at some point. Whether it's as a full collection or if you decide to start, give this a read.
Yeah, I'm actually. They were long. I was talking about the actual day-to-day writing life, but they were a sustaining thing for quite a while, in the sense that they shaped my day for many months, because every day I would get up and I would still be in both the memory mode that's prompting it, but also in the continuity of how I was finding my way into a particular memory. And it was gratifying, but I came to an end of it maybe 2 weeks ago. I mean, for the time being, it felt like, okay, this is a holding. This is the stuff. Yeah. I could keep making up shit, but this feels like it all belongs. But then it's like suddenly,
the past is not letting you alone?
Well, it never lets me alone. I'm thinking more of how I'm not what's the word for Joyce Carol? It's a graphile. She's not a graphile. What is she?
Graphomania?
Graphomania, right. Yeah. I don't have that. But I actually, and this I find more now, is I need to write. And it has to be writing with a detached purpose. It doesn't quite do the job to write a good letter to someone. Though that's pretty good anyway, in a different way. But I need something to be operating in that quadrant, wherever it is, which is where it all comes from for me, which is what I'm thinking as I'm pushing along the bread aisle. Yeah. I'm thinking about later in the afternoon, I'm going to, I've got the moment. I know what it is now. I'm going to go home. And then suddenly, I'm not having that right now. It's just, and this has happened enough in my life, so I know it's a question of letting the well fill up and blah, blah, blah. But just not having that as part of the structure, the inner structure of the day, changes things up, Yeah. Not for the worse, but it creates a certain idleness that was not there before. So I play more guitar, I do, cook
you do the
more,
other thing, you lay the groundwork for
that kind of stuff.
Without pushing. And you bring up in the book, the not note-taking vibe, the Kafka's thing of, if it's good, it'll cut back. Which I assume is bullshit, because I've had way too many great ideas that have vanished from my brain, and I'm convinced if I just followed up with them and had a note, I'd be all set.
Yeah.
On the drive up in complete sleep delirium, lack of sleep, I mean, on Friday there was the question of which element killed Icarus. Fire, water, earth, air.
Or hubris.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, but...
Oh, you mean the actual when they...
I don't know what the actual... Is it the fire? Is it the water? Is it falling through air?
I don't know if you watched some of these weird series.
Yeah.
We've been stuck for a long time on Vera.
No.
Oh, it's a British... She's kind of dotty, but she's there's many, many seasons. But each episode, there's a stylized kind of opening before the credits come on. And it's usually what it is that leads to the discovery of a body, wherever it is, in a dumpster in the ocean. And then in the beginning, she arrives where the her team is already there, including the medical, what's the word?
Pathologist or any...
Yeah, the one who's... And she always says, so what happened? And then there's a going through of what was it really? It looks like he fell, but no. If you look behind, there's a blow here to the back of the head, or there's this, or there's a needle mark somewhere. How did he die? Yeah. And once they've established that, then the show kind of gets going. It starts the trail to what
my forensic Icarus. That's going to be my next project that I never get to, which is why I need to write it down.
Yeah.
But Sven, thanks so much for coming on. I'm glad to see the new home. I'm glad to do the in-person thing again.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'll voice this book off on as many people as I can because, your writing's always a treasure and the essays are always a joy for me. So.
Okay. You got to stop that now.
And that was Sven Birkerts. Go get his new book, The Mirror Worm and the Mysteries of Writing, from Arrowsmith Press. These essays really are a treasure, and I promise they are not quite as digressive as the conversation you just heard. He really does have a focus to the prose. We just joke about how far afield things can really get. And really, go get his previous collections and book-length stuff like Changing the Subject, The Other Walk, The Art of Time and Memoir, The Gutenberg Elegies, and the one we previously did a show about, his exploration of Nabokov's Speak Memory in the Bookmarked series. That one's really, really good. Now, Sven is minimally online. His only social media presence, near as I can tell, he might be on Facebook, but I'm not there, is Instagram, where he is Sven.Birkerts51, Sven.Birkerts51. I'll have a link to that in the show and episode notes. He posts great photos there. All the photography we talked about and the stuff that he writes about in The Mirror Worm, his compositions are really fantastic. He also took a funny picture of me during the podcast session, which is up on the page. Anyway, you can support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Let them know there's this podcast, comes out every week, unless I'm traveling for business, that features really interesting conversations with fascinating cultural figures. You can also help out the show by telling me what you like and don't like about it, or who you'd like to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or art exhibition or theater or comic, whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by sending me a postcard or a letter. I put my mailing address at the bottom of the newsletter that I send out twice a week, which you should sign up for, by email or DM if we're connected on Blue Sky and Instagram, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number. And that's 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long, so you go longer than that, just call back, leave another message. And let me know if it'd be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might have something interesting to share with the listeners, but I'd never run something like that without the caller's permission. So let me know. Now, if you got money to spare, don't give it to me. Give it to people and institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowdfunder, all those crowdfunding platforms where there are people who need help making rent, medical bills, car payments, veterinary bills, might be trying to get an artistic project going. There's people who just need a couple of bucks to get by, and you might be able to make a real difference in their lives. So, do that. And when it comes to institutions, I give to my local food bank and World Central Kitchen every month. There are a lot of different things you can give to make a difference in this world. Freedom funds, election funds. I make targeted election funds because I'm a lobbyist. The Poor People's Campaign, Women's Choice, and Planned Parenthood. There's all sorts of stuff you can do if you just have a few dollars to spare that might make a difference in this world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY, the number 4, TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.